Hi, I'm Cedar Hulet. I'm born and raised in Idaho, and I teach fishing classes for the Continuing Education and Workforce Training program at ISU. I grew up in a family that was very outdoorsy and very nature-oriented. We were going camping every weekend, fishing as often as possible. And so through that, I just kind of was constantly exposed to fishing in the outdoors. I often lead off my class by telling the story of how I caught my first fish at 10 months old. And so from there it evolved to me being more and more interested, more and more fascinated by fishing and fish in general. And to the point where I was like, you know, I kind of want to start sharing this information about all these things I've learned over the years. And I would do that just by taking out like local groups of Boy Scouts or novice anglers, people who are looking to just learn something new or get out with somebody who knew what the heck they were doing. And my mom, Marjana Hulet, came to me one day and she said, "Hey, I know this lady. She's got this program over at ISU, and she's wondering if you would like to teach a class for her." I was like, "Sure, why not?" And so I've been teaching now for the continuing education program for, I think, 3 years now, 2 or 3 years. I offer a How to Catch Fish in Southeast Idaho class, which just covers the basics of here's how you find these species of fish and just things to look out for, how to think about weather and temperature and all these things and how they relate to fish, habitat, and things like that. And the next class I teach is a fly fishing class, which is actually the class I was approached about because continuing education was being approached a lot asking if they had a fly fishing class, and they were like, "We don't." And so they asked me to teach that, and that's just an introductory class, teaching you like how to tie the knots, how to cast, how to find fish a little bit, just enough that you can kind of start figuring it out on your own, and then we go and put all those skills into use. And then I offer 2 fly tying courses, which is, as part of fly fishing, you're fishing with a teeny little hook that's had a bunch of feather and fur glued and wrapped to it, tied to it, to make it look like an insect. And so the art of fly tying is kind of essential to fly fishing itself, and for those who want to learn that skill, I offer a beginning and intermediate class. The main structure is a few days in the classroom where we take care of all the book work, all the lecturing, all the knots, just all the little basic stuff. And then the final day, we go out to a local lake or river and put it all into practice and try and get everybody to catch some fish and have some fun. Whenever I start a class, I usually ask why they decided to get back into fishing or to get into fishing or what have you. And the predominant answer is they're wanting to learn something new because they've found a little spot in their life where there's not really anything going on, and they're thinking, you know what, maybe fishing would be a fun thing to do to fill that space. Maybe they did it when they were younger. The predominant age group for my classes is actually folks 50 and older. Folks that are going into retirement even are pretty common. And so it's often people who suddenly find themselves with a whole bunch of new free time, and they're looking to fill that. And so they're mostly looking to learn knots and just the basics, the stuff that you need to know to go out and catch some fish. In each classroom session, I structure it in a very informal manner. I talk a little bit, let them ask questions, and then we get one-on-one for a little bit while everybody kind of puts into practice what we just learned and kind of tries and figures it out and does examples and things. And the best feeling in the world for me is when all of a sudden they just get it. And they're able to do it over and over and over again, and they're able to say, yeah, I was able to do this, whether it's casting, whether it's knots, whether it's like fish identification, or even the moment when they catch a fish sometimes is when that aha moment finally comes. And that's easily the most rewarding part of the entire class. We'll start with the first fishing class I taught. It was mostly a class of, it was a pretty large class. I think it was 8 people, eight or 9 people. And the majority of them were 40 years old or older. There were a couple of guys in their 20s and 30s, and there was this one girl, young teenage girl. She was like 16, and she always showed up early. She always showed up like ready to learn and everything, but she never asked questions. She never really participated more than she needed to. Occasionally, when we were doing like putting into practice the knots or stuff like that, she would ask little questions when we were doing hands-on stuff. But for the most part, she was very quiet and very reserved part of the class. And that kind of struck me because there was no other kids in the class, and you would expect her to kind of be a little bit more rambunctious. Her parents aren't there, that kind of thing. She's obviously invested and interested. And I never really got why she was there, why she was taking the class, until we did the field day, went out and went fishing. And the way we do that was we all meet at the classroom, because it's a common meeting place, and then we all go out to the spot. And we meet up there. A handful of people couldn't make it, that's okay. She wasn't there, this teenager wasn't there. And so I was like, okay, whatever. There's several other people missing as well, that's okay. Attendance isn't required in this class. You're getting out of it what you put into it. And so we all go out there and we're fishing along, and as I'm looking around, I see this couple of people over here down the shoreline. And as we're kind of fishing, we're moving closer towards them, we're moving down the bank and everything. And come to find out, it's this young girl and her grandfather. And it turns out that he has been teaching her to fish for most of her entire life, and she's intensely passionate about it, and she knew pretty much everything I was already teaching. And she had been there since long before we ever met up for the class to go out there. And that just struck me, because here's somebody who's obviously just as passionate about it as I am, and who, rather than go with the flow and stick with the group, has the guts to just kind of branch out on her own, and in the end ended up catching far more fish than even I did on that trip. I'm also a hunter, so I spend a lot of time in the fall, usually hunting and up in the mountains, hiking around. Let's see, I do a little bit of cartooning, a little bit of drawing, nothing serious, just enough to kind of entertain myself most days. Probably the other biggest facet for me is I'm a bit of a tinkerer. As I grow and change and learn, it is constantly evolving. And right now, my favorite part of fishing, if I had to pick one specific thing, would have to be just the places I get to go. And I consider myself very blessed. I live in Idaho. There's places to fish less than a half-hour's drive. If I wanted to, I could walk to a couple of spots here in town. And no matter what, whether the fish are there, whether they're not, whether they're biting, whether they're not, I get to look up and see a row of mountains. And I often stay late into the day just so I can watch the sunset.